Good morning and a very warm welcome to the second day of International Leadership Week 2021. I'm Katie Clark, Business Development Manager at the Institute of Leadership and Management. Just before we start our topic today on can I be mindful and an enterprising leader simultaneously with Shilpi Chugh, I just wanted to share with you a short introduction to the Institute. So we're a professional body focusing on developing leadership capability for over 70 years to achieve our core mission to inspire great leadership everywhere. We have a engaged community of over 50,000 leaders and managers at every stage of their career across all industry sectors and covering over 70 countries. As mentioned, today I'm delighted to be joined by Shilpi, based in India. Shilpi is head of HR at Dyson and has been ranked in the 101 HR Super Achievers in India by the World HRD Congress. I'm really excited to hear what she has to say today. So without further ado, I'm delighted to hand over to Shilpi.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you so much for the warm introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody who's joined us today from whichever part of the world. My name is Shilpi. I'll give you a quick introduction of myself. I head HR for Dyson in India, and I have close to about 15 years of experience working in HR across different geographies and different companies. It's only in the last 3 to 4 years that I got very deeply interested in the subject of leadership, and really speaking leadership from a lens of self-growth, self-evolution, really looking at it from a lens of human evolution and human growth. And I have actually, as I was reflecting on the subject of mindful leadership, I realized the impact of leaders and leadership on really raising the collective consciousness of the organizations and of people across in the organizations, and the impact that it can really have on people is really crucial. So with that set in mind, I wanted to particularly speak about mindful leadership and why I believe that mindful leadership is going to be the singular most important differentiator for organizations to really not just survive, but as well thrive through the crisis and through the chaotic times that we are in. So really that's my thinking on as I step into this webinar and really want to talk a little bit more about, is it possible for us to be mindful and enterprising simultaneously? So jumping right in, really the world has changed, and how? The last 2 years have truly seen unprecedented times. And when I was reflecting on the kind of really the environmental challenges that have been produced, I saw a lot of dynamic and a lot of dichotomies being produced, and the multitude of challenges that leaders were thrown in. And I'd like to really pull out a few of those as I saw as clear themes that are coming out. The first one of that being an extreme chaotic and a hugely turbulent environment. Now, in the last decade or so, we have already seen and heard and spoken a lot about VUCA as an environment, volatility, uncertainty, complexity. And in many ways, we have prepared ourselves as well as our leaders to deal with a certain degree of ambiguity. However, why I see this particularly important is that this is an extreme end of turbulence. This is an extreme end of chaos. It's not just complex. The environment is not just about varied degree of dynamicity induced in the environment, but this, in the last 2 years, what we have seen is an extreme end of turbulence, which basically means that nobody today has clear idea of what is going to happen next, what new lens and what new dynamicity would be introduced in the environment. And there is complete ambiguity, absolute ambiguity, with absolute zero correlation between the cause and effect relationship at all. Now, why I call this as a big dichotomy is that the way we are wired as human beings, the way we are wired as our human brains, we are completely threatened by ambiguity. A brain is wired to respond and react basis our experiences in the past, how we have dealt with it, and the patterns that we have created in our brains clearly. And every time there is an ambiguity of an extent like this, our brain truly feels threatened. And what happens at that point in time is that immediately the human moves to the lowest level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is coming back to the basic needs of the sense of security, psychological safety. And mind you, we are talking about human beings, so effectively leaders as well are human beings, and many a times we tend to forget that. So in this kind of an environment where our minds are not equipped to deal with ambiguity, and we are wired to feel more comfortable in a setup that we are very comfortable with, this produces a significant level of dichotomy and a challenge in the leader's mind. The second one of which is a higher need for collective intellect. So whenever there is a huge chaos in the environment, whenever there's a war outside, the immediate next thing that one would want to do is get everybody together. Let's look at mass, let's look at our teams together, let's look at collaborating to the best. Right? And not just information, knowledge, we've spoken about it many a times earlier as well. Information has now become a commodity. What is truly valued is intellect. And in an environment which is hugely chaotic and highly turbulent, it is the factor of intellect, and a collective intellect, because nobody has the right solutions. It's a collective intellect which is going to play a role for us to solve for what we are facing with. However, the world went virtual. The entire teams were working from home. While there was a huge adoption on the digital technology, huge adoption on really using the digital tools to enable collaboration, we also saw the human level of collaboration reduced. People were collaborating, but they were collaborating with their own network where there's a degree of comfort is relatively higher. The quantum of collaboration was largely restricted towards work and work matters, and also really reducing the human level of collaboration. There's a study that tells us that the team collaboration in a natural setup of organizations effectively reduced to a degree of 66% as we went virtual. Not to rule out the amount of support that we got from the digital setup, but as well the entire collaboration overall was on a low. So that's the second dichotomy that I felt was a clear trend that was emerging as we have entered into this crisis. The third, and the one which also I see as sort of summing up largely the theme of the discussion today, is enterprising leadership was the expectation of leadership. I was looking at one of the studies, and it said close to about 43% of small size organizations could not see the light of the day post practically towards the end of the COVID. The amount of job losses, etc., we are very, very clearly aware of. Enterprising leadership, as I define it, is essentially when it is a question of business survival, when it is a question of leading in an environment which is very turbulent, leading in an environment which is chaotic. What kind of leadership is expected? Leadership which will take control, leadership which will have action, leadership that would require somebody to take tougher calls if needed. But the clear dichotomy emerging in this particular point is that the number one characteristic, if you ask across the globe, the CEOs and the leaders, what is that number one characteristic that's required of the leadership today? It's the empathetic leadership. And that was the need of the hour, because people across were significantly impacted at a personal level. So the only way style of leadership that could have stayed was empathetic leadership. And that was truly the need of the hour. And the last one is about global social network. Now, global networks, social networks have been fairly prominent in the last 5 or 6 years and significantly increased as well. But in the last 2 years, the entire life of people went virtual. Everything that people wanted to share, people wanted to speak, was all out there in social networks. Now, couple it with enterprising leadership and looking at everything is available virtual and everything is there for people to see, there was clearly an expectation of brutal transparency, brutal authenticity in leaders across. Whatever they did, how they did, was all out there for people to see and for everybody in the world to gauge and judge. Right? Keeping these four key trends as I saw were emerging and the dichotomies as I saw were emerging, what I realized is that the challenge with leaders was not just one aspect of leadership, but it was an entire multitude of leadership. People were operating at the lowest end of their needs, which was survival, which was protecting themselves, saving their loved ones. So the mindset was actually going at the lowest level of Maslow's need. However, we were also expecting our leaders to be fully enterprising. We were also expecting our leaders to be extremely empathetic, act out of purpose. And there is a huge stretch that we were expecting from our leaders to operate to make sure that the businesses, along with the teams and along with the leadership, are really not just surviving but as well thriving. So with that, what that did to the leaders was a tremendous degree of stress and a tremendous degree of tension that was induced on leaders. One of the studies actually says that it was a study conducted across 10,000 leaders across the globe. 77% of those reported that their leadership and the stress that they are feeling in their leadership jobs is significantly higher than what it was. And all of this collectively really makes me believe that what is that kind of how do we truly prepare our leaders? How do we really get to the bottom of it and really create solid leaders who can not just survive but thrive in an environment of crisis? Right? So really the big question to ask is that how are we preparing our leaders to deal with the crisis, to deal with an environment which is as turbulent and as dynamic as it is currently? And it will be really naive for us to assume that this is the only crisis that we are ever dealt with. This might be the worst. There was a financial crisis back in 2008 and 10. There was a huge recession that the world saw. There were crises of different sorts. There will be more that will come. I think the question we need to ask is part of this collective group and the leadership group, that truly what are organizations doing today to prepare the leaders who can deal with the situations across with complete conviction, to make sure that they are leading with lower level of stress and better well-being than what has truly happened in the last couple of years. So I asked this question to myself, right? And when I went to look at some of the things that, okay, so what do we expect of leaders whenever it is a situation of turbulence, it's COVID, nobody knows anything that's happening, we are all reacting out of what we best know. What the words that came up to my mind are, one, we are expecting our leaders to be empathetic. Sure, of course, we definitely want our leaders to be acting out of sheer concern, sheer service mindset, and be empathetic to the leaders. We want our leaders to be authentic, to be brutally authentic about who they are, what they are doing, why they are doing. All of those are very, very important factors when we think about leading in the times that we are leading in. Communication, again, very, very high degree of communication across the organization, across the teams that you manage, which we expect out of our leaders, that if you are leading in such times, just keep communicating. Do not leave anything for guessing. There is no space for people to make assumptions or presumptions. Let's communicate what we best know in all authenticity. We expect resilience. We expect our leaders to stand up their own fears, their own needs, and we want our leaders to be absolutely resilient in an environment like this and take bolder calls, take more courageous calls. And lastly, of course, enterprising and to some extent also strategic, because we reshaped the business operating models everywhere. People spoke about digitization, that's the buzzword, right from enterprising, doing what it takes, to also thinking strategically how the consumer behavior is shifting. So we really have a host of expectations out of our leaders, and rightfully so. And these are the characteristics that we expect our leaders to exhibit when it is truly the times of chaos and crisis. What I actually wanted to go a little bit deeper to understand, so what would make a leader truly authentic? What would make a leader be able to make decisions in times when information, in times when collaboration is compromised? What truly gives that strength to the leader to become resilient in times which are absolutely chaotic? What gives them the capacity to grow over themselves, right? So all of this is all important, but what is underneath it? And that brought me to the point around mindful. Okay? And mindful can be explained in a variety of ways, but the way I look at mindfulness is really operating from a space of knowing, really operating from a space of awareness. And the awareness essentially, it could be self-awareness, could be awareness about knowing more and more about yourself. And that's the lens when I spoke in the beginning, that for me, mindfulness is really coming from a space of how, as a leader, I am increasing my capacity of knowing myself and being more aware of myself. And the more I know myself, my ability to understand and my ability to know and become more aware of what's happening around me, what's happening in the environment around me, what's happening with the people around me, my ability to have a meaningful connect with the people and knowing what is the impact that I'm doing and having on people also increases proportionately. So the way I define mindfulness, and I truly believe that as a leader, for anybody to be able to stay true to many of these facets, and there could be a few more, but many of these characteristics, is truly the journey that starts from within, and that starts from knowing your own self and really understanding the space that you operate from. And that's a journey, that's a leadership journey, that's a mindful leader and growing as a mindful leader. Okay. Just going a little bit further on self-awareness, self-knowledge, mindful leadership, right? There are three most important factors to that I see. The first one of being is purposeful intention. And intention, we have a Sanskrit word in India which is called sankalp. And intention is truly, why do I do what I do? What is my motivation for making a certain decision? What is truly driving me to do what I am doing? My action is deep rooted into what is my motivation? And why I overlay it with purposeful intention is purely because purpose for me is very, very important in a way that is a leader's intention, is a leader's motivation deep rooted in something that's purely restricted to self or something that's broader. It's like a compass that you have in your mind every time you're making a decision, that am I making this decision that's going to be beneficial purely for me? Is that what is motivating me? Or it is something that's going to benefit 5 people who work with me? Is that going to benefit the organization that I'm working for? Is that going to benefit the larger community and society that I'm working from? And that is your purposeful intention. If you are stepping slightly above your own self and looking at your own self from a slightly larger lens, and is my intention, is my deep rooted motivation is something that is broader than myself, then I call it more like a purposeful intention. And every time I think that the lens, if a leader makes himself or herself more aware of what is the intention that I am operating from and try to calibrate it towards a little bit more purposeful, then you're fully aligned in terms of being more empathetic, more authentic. People start to see you consistently when you're operating from a space of purpose, start to see you more consistently over a period of time coming from that purposeful self, which helps in creating deeper emotional connections. And this is not something that happens overnight. This is something which I always say is a journey and is a lens that a choice that a leader makes every time when they are in their roles of leaders, because that's the space that as a leader the first responsibility comes from, which is beyond your own self. So that's my first piece on a leader should definitely be mindful of the intention. The second important piece there is a very deep understanding of what are my personal values as a human being and as a leader. um, a lot of times we as leaders do not spend enough time in uncovering the lower side of the iceberg and see a lot of symptoms on the top of the iceberg. We do not see where do we as leaders truly make decisions from, and a lot of that sits under the iceberg in the personal values. And I am a firm believer of a leader needs to spend ample time in understanding and uncovering their own personal values, because only once you are able to identify and become consciously aware of that is when you start to operate in full alignment from your core self. You start making more conscious decisions which are aligned to your own full self. Now, how does that help? Once a leader consistently practices operating in full alignment with your core self, you end up becoming a leader, ends up becoming one more authentic. People experience a leader as more authentic, which is one of the key characteristics we believe is important for leaders to thrive in crisis, and secondly also make them far more resilient, because you are in full alignment. We have a theory, we have a belief in the Indian scriptures and in the Indian way of being, that the 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 human being operates at a full potential when there is full alignment between mind, body, and soul. So the values in my experience and my views truly give you that full alignment, and you bring yourself completely as a leader, and your foundation become very, very strong. That's the second important aspect. And the last but not the least is respond, not react. And this piece is a continuous practice. And just referring back to what I was talking about, the way our brains are structured, the way our brains operate, I see 3 layers of our brains and how we react, respond to situations. The first one at the lowest level is reactionary brain. Reactionary brain essentially is, I have been in certain situations before, so if I get induced in a similar situation, I will quickly pick up the same pattern. Oh, I have done this before in that situation, and I will react to it immediately. So that's my reaction. There is merit in putting that in context. The second level of brain, in my opinion, speaks to the logical brain, where I have been able to hold back my reaction for some time and be open to hearing different point of views, and in my own brain able to correlate and say, okay, this is logically making more sense. So the second level of brain really takes me to the logical side of the brain, where I'm able to logically assess the situation and then respond appropriately. And the third level of the brain actually is the mindful brain, where I have trained as a leader ample enough to be able to step out of the situation and be least impacted by it, and observe the situation and then make rational decisions accordingly. So this to me is a journey and a practice which takes me from a reactionary brain to first to the logical brain, and then eventually to the mindful operating side of the brain. So these three, as a practice, I believe, are three of the most crucial self-awareness and self becoming more mindful of your own self as a leader, which gives very, very strong foundation to leaders to be able to operate in an environment which is extremely dynamic, gives that right amount of strength to be able to respond to the environment appropriately. So coming back to my same question, and I want to leave it at this thought as a community of leaders. Um, what are we doing to really prepare our leaders and really have that growth journey, evolution of leaders, to be able to prepare them to deal with any future crisis, and if that happens at all? Do organizations have the patience? Because everybody will have their own journey. It's about self evolution. Everybody will have their journey. Do organizations have that level of patience and that level of investment to make in growing the leaders? And I believe that we have a responsibility to evolve our leaders. Leadership is the single biggest factor that impacts the well-being of all the working population across the globe. And today we are talking about well-being being impacted significantly. What are we doing to prepare our leaders so that we take care as responsible corporate corporate leaders to truly make our leadership evolve, leaders grow? So on that note, I would leave it at that. Um, Back to
Thank
you, Katie, if there are any questions. Happy to answer them at this point, open up, learn from people who have.
Brilliant. Thank you, Shilpi. We do have some questions, and a theme that's coming up in these questions is how, as a leader, I can be more mindful, but also, can mindfulness be taught? Can mindfulness be taught, or is it something that's innate?
Yeah. So, I mean, both very good questions. So, firstly, I'll take the second question first. Can mindfulness be taught? Okay. I do believe that there needs to be a certain amount of drive and hunger in the individual themselves to be able to evolve themselves. So that's a basic hygiene, I assume. Now, can mindfulness be taught? Yes, mindfulness can be taught. And why I say that, I essentially say that with a lot of experience. Once you really induce a certain level of consciousness expansion, some level of input to somebody, some mind who is hungry, mindfulness can definitely be taught. It grows over. I don't think that it is something that cannot be taught. It absolutely can be taught. What leaders can do themselves, and I have I have spoken about this to many, many leaders in the past, is that there is one single thing you need to commit yourself on a daily basis. You need to commit yourself to a daily ritual, whatever that may be. It could be meditation, it could be a walk, it could be a drive, it could be a run, whatever works for you, it could be music. You need to commit yourself for a single ritual daily and practice reflection. Practice how could I have done things differently today? Just think about different scenarios. Am I challenging myself slightly out of comfort zone? So that is one thing that I truly believe that a leader can do, and very simple action that they can take to really work towards their mindful, them evolving to become more mindful leaders.
Brilliant. And one really last question. Should leaders be proactive and not just respond to the environment?
Yeah, leaders should definitely be proactive. Unfortunately, in the last 2 years, we have seen a lot of response. I am appealing to the organizations and to everybody overall to be more proactive in investing in their leaders and the true growth for leaders effectively. But leaders can definitely be more proactive, invest in themselves, keep working on themselves, because that's the only thing that's going to stay true to you once we are in a situation like that. We expect ourselves to be calm in complete chaos. That's not going to happen overnight. We have to be proactive in working on ourselves truly from the space that.
And I think that's a really nice thought to kind of end the webinar on, Shilpi. So thank you so much for this presentation and for joining us today and being part of International Leadership Week as well. For our audience, if you'd like to engage and discuss further, please go to our website, and in the top right-hand corner, you can click on and access our hub, where you can continue the discussion about mindfulness and about being an enterprising leader. Alternatively, if you'd like to continue the chat on social media, please use the hashtags on our social posts, hashtag ILW21. I'd also like to thank Shilpi once again. Thank you so much. And a big thank you to our sponsors, Belbin and Edinburgh Business School. And of course, to our audience, thank you so much and goodbye.
Thank you so much. Thanks. Thank you, Katie. Thanks.